What's up, everybody? Welcome to another episode of MUT Tips. I am your host, Sean Taylor, and I'm going to discuss another concept of improvisational comedy today. If you enjoyed the video, give it a like, share the video, subscribe on YouTube, all that fun stuff. Leave a comment with somebody you'd like addressed in the future. But other than that, without further ado, let's get into our topic for today. The Antagonist. So in a past video, we discussed the protagonist related to improvised scenes and improvised narratives, and we used Luke Skywalker from Star Wars as kind of our basis for examining that character. And again, the protagonist is essentially a filter that the audience views the story through. This is the hero's journey, or the main character's, odyssey towards some type of arc or some type of conclusion. The antagonist, though, is the contrast to that, essentially the threat, the obstacle to the protagonist's journey. And in improvised narratives especially, I love to play this character. I love playing the antagonistic character because I consider myself a fairly nice person. I'm pretty kind to people. So when I get on stage and I'm able to play the bad guy in an improvised narrative, then I love it because it's something that I get to experiment with different characters, and I don't have to put emphasis on getting the crowd to like me. I get to have fun with them, disliking my character. In fact, in pro wrestling, there's good guys and there's bad guys, and generally most pro wrestlers like to be the bad guy because it's a lot easier to get illicit boos from an audience than it is to elicit cheers from the audience. So let's talk a little bit about the antagonistic character and how it can pertain to improvised narratives. So in movies and in improvised narratives, generally the antagonist has a want. Just like the protagonist, they have a want or they have a motivation. Why are they doing the bad things that they're doing? There's a reason behind it generally. And it's really cool if we show that a little bit in improvised narratives to make them not so much just a one-dimensional, cliche, stereotypical character like, I'm gonna rule the world. Well, why? I just want to. There's a reason behind this stuff. There's a reason, whether it's revenge, whether it's because of a traumatic experience that led them down a dark path. Magneto, for example, in X-Men, he was a victim of the Holocaust, which gave him a bad view upon humanity, which makes him want to lash out against humans in the world. And Darth Vader, you don't get to see a lot of why he is evil in A New Hope, which is his first appearance in the movies of Star Wars. But as the trilogy unfolds, we get to see a little bit more humanity behind him. The fact that he is in that suit. We get to discover that he is scarred by something that happened in the past and that helped and assisted him in going down a dark road. So by having that level of depth to an antagonistic character, it makes them more memorable for the audience. So another thing with antagonists is their status. They generally view themselves as high status characters, whether or not they are actually high status characters in their environment. So an example of this is in A New Hope. Darth Vader is kind of a little bit more lower status in this movie. He's not seen as the high supreme ruling leader of the Sith. He's just kind of like a little pawn. He's ordered around by the Imperial officers. They talk back to him. He still, though, exerts his status, though. He still views himself as a high-status character, and he shows defiance against those officers. And ultimately, by the end of the movie, he is the main threat to Luke Skywalker. He's taken out all of the rebel pilots as they're trying to take down the Death Star, so he is exerting himself as a high-status character. So to coincide with the high status of the antagonist needs to win a lot. They need to have a lot of authority and they have to have a lot of victories in their narrative because ultimately it's going to create dramatic tension. Will the heroes overcome the antagonist? We're going to have to find out. And this calls back to my protagonist talk where I talked about Luke Skywalker in the narrative of A New Hope. He lost a lot in that movie. He had a lot of heartbreak, he had a lot of moments where all seemed lost, and thus when we get to the moment when he reaches his arc, it's more powerful. But in order for that to happen, the antagonist needs to be a powerful individual. So when I'm the antagonist, I go balls out. I have a lot of choices on stage that try to negate what the protagonist is trying to achieve in life. Not negate like I'm denying that person. I'm just exerting an authority, and the protagonist ultimately will be losing in that portion of the story. But when he or she reaches the climax, the arc of that character is a lot more powerful, but it can only be powerful by the powerful choices that the antagonist inflicts upon the protagonist. So you need to be a super proud, confident character when you're playing an antagonist, because you have a very, 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 very outlandish point of view on the world, and thus you need to convey a strong philosophy and commitment to that point of view. So the last thing I'll talk about here today is the arc of the antagonist. Protagonists have arcs. It's that defining moment that they have been working towards throughout the course of the narrative, when they overcome their flaws, they overcome the obstacles they have met along the way, and they reach that defining moment when they transform into a better person. They have that victory, that moment. Luke Skywalker has it in A New Hope when he helps take down the Death Star and starts to use the Force. It's a little arc for his character, one of many. And antagonists, they can have arcs as well. Like looking at Darth Vader, I'm going to look at him in two different ways, both a regressive way and a progressive way. So let's start with regressive, and in order to look at Darth Vader at this, we kind of need to go to the prequels, unfortunately. But in the prequels, essentially the entire trilogy is leading up to that moment where Anakin Skywalker makes the choice to essentially become Darth Vader. And this choice is kind of building for a while, and essentially in episode 3, he starts to become more of an antagonistic character, right? And then there's a moment when he makes the defining choice to essentially join the dark side permanently. And that moment is when he's trying to actually save someone. He's trying to save Padme from potential death. And he's essentially tricked. He's manipulated into becoming essentially what will become known as the defining character of Darth Vader. So that's a choice that happens. There's a lot of examples of this. For example, Taxi Driver. The arc at the end of that is that Travis Bickle essentially continues to go further down a dark path. This is usually a very common form of arc. It's when a character who's an antagonist might have a choice to essentially turn a new leaf and become a good character or start to strive towards that. A lot of times they don't do that though. They essentially continue down the dark path and become even more of an antagonistic character, which might lead to their demise or essentially their inevitable defeat. So the progressive arc. First of all, it's an arc that usually needs to be earned. It's not something that works well if you just drop it in randomly where, oh, the bad guy suddenly decides to be a good guy without any motivation. He just was like, I don't want to be a bad guy anymore. I'll be a good guy. Generally, there's going to be hints that are going to be dropped, and there are hints that are dropped within Return of the Jedi. We get to see a bit of a conflicted nature with Darth Vader as he talks to his son towards the end of the movie. And of course, that leads us to the final moment of the movie. There's a spoiler alert right here. Spoiler alert, please. At the end of the movie, he's met with a choice. After losing to his son and losing his hand, he has a choice to either continue to regress down into the path of the dark side, or he has a choice to make a sacrifice, to make an unselfish choice to save his son who's being killed by the Emperor. And at that moment, he lifts up the Emperor, throws him into a dark chasm below where he eventually blows up and dies, but inflicts a death blow to Darth Vader himself. But at that moment, it feels earned. It's probably the most defining moment in the entire trilogy, where someone as evil as Darth Vader, if you look at how he was portrayed in A New Hope, based on all of the information that we've gathered from that movie, he has an earned arc where he turns back to the light side, and he allows himself to free himself from the grasp of the dark side and save his son and return to the light. We was building up to that moment, and it does it really fantastically. But again, it needs to be earned. We got to earn that type of arc. And ladies and gentlemen, that concludes this episode of MUT Tips. Ladies and gentlemen, that concludes this episode of MUT Tips. Some thoughts on the antagonist and improvised narratives. Again, they're a lot of fun to play, so try it out if you don't do it too often. And ladies and gentlemen, that concludes this episode of MUT Tips. Just some thoughts on the antagonist. And again, if you want to check out the protagonist video that I recorded, it's episode 9. Feel free to check that out. Some fun thoughts on Luke Skywalker's journey in A New Hope. But other than that, everybody, thank you so much. Again, we're here next week. Check us out. Feel free to leave a comment, like the video, share it, subscribe on YouTube, all that fun stuff. And I will see you next week. And just remember, as they say, the devil gets the best lines. Bye, everybody. Whoa, what's going on there?